Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about in regards to the kingdom plants is how plants reproduce. So this is learning target 35, describe and model how plants can reproduce. Okay, so reproduction, there are two types. Asexual, meaning there are no individual sex cells. That means the offspring are identical to the parents. Most plants reproduce this way. And then there is sexual reproduction. That means plants have the two different sex cells, and the offspring is genetically different because it's a combination from two different sex cells. Okay, so we're going to focus on how plants reproduce sexually. So the pollen grain is the water-resistant covering that contains the male sex sperm, or male sex cell, which is called the sperm. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from the female part of the plant to the male part, and that's usually done by wind, gravity, could be done by animals or water currents. So there you've got a picture of a bee with getting pollen on them. So yes, that's all the sex cell in there. That's the plant's sperm and the pollen. Okay, so let's take a look at this diagram. How flowering plants reproduce. Okay, so one plant produces in the ovule or ovary, produces an egg, which is the female part of the plant, the female sex cell. It gets pushed, and that's where it stays. It stays down there. It doesn't get pushed, sorry. Okay, then up here, this is called the stamen with the filament and anther, and it shows you a bigger picture of it. Inside the anther is the pollen, which contains the male sex cell. Okay, that pollen grain gets released into the air from this plant, and it lands on the stigma, which is the female part of the plant, of another plant. So these are two different plants. When that pollen grain lands on the stigma, the sticky part of the female reproductive system of the plant, the sperm cells, sex cells, travel down through the pollen tubes, and they fertilize the egg in the ovaries of the plant. That creates a seed inside an embryo. Then that seed is released, and you can have a new plant come from there. So that is why the offspring of the plants are genetically different, because you're getting half of the genes from this plant are going to this plant. So you're getting half of one plant, half of another plant, and that's where you get different offspring for the plants. So I like to do this a lot when I have my columbines. I have different color of columbine in my garden. I have purple, I have yellow, and I have red. And over time, the columbines have crossbred between the different colors of columbine, and now I have a mixture. So I have a mixture of red and yellow columbines that came from one yellow columbine and from one red. I also have a mixture of purple and red columbines, and it makes sort of a pink colored columbine. So it's really fun to do crossbreeding between different types of plants. They have to be the same type of flowering plant, but it's fun to make the different colors. So I do that a lot with my columbines. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so the seed is where the male and female sex cell is fertilized. Okay, it develops into a seed. So basically the female sex cell, the ovary, gets fertilized by the male sex cell, and that creates a seed. An embryo forms around the seed, and that's what stores food and protects the seed. When we talked about that in our evolution unit, angiosperms that made seeds that were protected by an embryo were allowed to evolve and survive over time in different climates. That's one of the reasons why angiosperms make up most of the earth as far as plants. Okay, so let's take a look at the parts of the plants that are involved in reproduction. So the stamen is the male reproductive organ of a plant. It has the anther where the pollen grains form, and the filament which supports the anther. So let's take a look at that. Okay, these right here are the stamen. This part right here is the filament. It supports the top part, the anther, which holds the pollen grains. Then you've got the female part called the ovary, where the eggs are produced. This is called the pistil. Okay, this piece right here is the pistil. The style is what transfers the pollen grain down through, and then down below is your ovary, where the ovaries contain the female sex cell that get fertilized by the pollen to create a seed. So you are going to want to draw this picture. I'll make it just a little bit smaller so you can see it on full screen. You're going to want to draw this picture because we're actually going to do a lab where you dissect a flower, an angiosperm, and you're going to be able to see most of these parts of most of the reproductive parts of a plant, of an angiosperm. So you might want to put that in your notes. Okay, so that's the different ways that plants can reproduce, and then you will be doing a lab to model this. So that's target 35.